Uh,
Today's today's topic is morphosyntactic alignment. And don't worry, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what that is. But this is kind of like the way I kind of approached this was, the default background here is math and maybe computer science. Of course, it's in the name. So this is kind of like an experiment, if you will, to see like, get a baseline reading on what are the best ways to convey these concepts and things from another field with my understanding of, what might be the shared background for the people here. So, it's definitely distant from math, but I'm going to be trying to bridge that gap and get everyone on the same page. Definitely jump in and interrupt if you have questions. I think it's much more interesting like that. Um, and I do have some more interactive parts to this. Sound good? Okay. So when we talk about morphosyntactic alignment, we can, as people examining language, we can look at the words kind of figure out where we're going to be. So morphosyntactic is the adjective form of morphosyntax. Unless you study linguistics, you probably don't hear the word syntactic a lot, and you may think that you should say something like syntactic. You can say syntactic, that's fine. I'm not gonna, you're not gonna get in trouble for that. Um, and morphosyntax is a blend of morphology and syntax. What is morphology? Broadly, a linguistic subfield concerned with the study of words. Syntax, broadly concerned with the study of grammatical structure. You notice I have asterisks here. This is because there's a lot more, this is oversimplifying a lot of things, a lot of interesting things, so you can ask me about that if you want. But that's that. And then for alignment, this is not AI alignment, as someone asked in the channel previously. This is, I think, probably the usage of alignment here predates the use of AI alignment by a wide, not too, some margin. I don't know. I don't know what the ethics research was like in the 20th century. So what are we aligning? Um, we are aligning our morphology and syntax, so our words and our grammar, and getting them aligned. So what does that mean? Because that might still be confusing. Um, space. So we're aligning arguments. When we talk about that in linguistics, this is what we're concerned with. And when I say arguments, you can really I think you can think about this in kind of the way you might in a computer science context or a programming context. So, I have this function header of like this pseudocode function header for the add1 function. You can imagine this as a function that takes in a number and adds an takes in an integer and adds 1 to it. So, you input 5 and you get back 6. You can see in this function signature that we have one parameter that's an integer n, and the return type is integer. We won't worry too much about the return type, but right, we have a single parameter of type integer. We can imagine a subtract function that takes two integers and subtracts one from the other. So there are two parameters, and crucially, these are ordered, right? If I swap my inputs n and m, I'm going to get a different behavior within the function. So the order of the parameters does matter. I feel like there's a bit of semantics that I never fully internalize as to when we use the word, parameter versus argument versus, I feel like there's another word in there. But you could say that, okay, add1 has one parameter, it takes an argument. Or subtract has two parameters, it takes two arguments. Is that something that seems reasonable or familiar from people with a programming background? Please shout out if you can.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you can just think of that when we're talking about arguments as these inputs to these functions, and how that relates to the behavior of the function. So where are the arguments in language? In our verbs, if you think about a function as an algorithm that relates that algorithm to its inputs, so we have the subtract function. We need to relate the algorithm of subtracting to the two numbers. There's the function. What the function does is it does that, right? When we think about a verb you can think about it in the traditional grammatical sense. It's some sort of action, right? We have nouns and verbs. Nouns are things. Verbs are actions, dynamic things that occur. When you have, sorry, Natalia, there's some static in the background. So if definitely unmute if you have like questions or something like that. But yeah, thanks. Also for the people who've just joined, definitely interrupt if you have questions or comments. I think that makes it more interesting. So we have an action in our verb that needs to be related to its participants. If you think about something like hitting someone, the action of hitting someone, that has two participants in it. You have the person doing the hitting and the person that is being hit. So you can think about those two as the arguments of the verb. The verb hit requires two arguments, someone to do the hitting and someone to be hit. And like with the subtract example from earlier, this order matters, right? It's not some sort of reflexive action. It matters a lot, as you can imagine, if you're talking to someone, whether like who's getting hit by who. So here's a kind of starting point to get us to move this terminology over and figure out what we're talking about. Can you fill in, like, from maybe a pseudocode perspective or however you might want to talk about it, the argument structure for these verbs? So let's say we have these three verbs, walk, like, and eat. I've put a return type of clause, but that doesn't really matter. You can imagine like a total sentence, a total clause occurs when we take a verb and we add its arguments to it. So if I have a verb walk, what, based on your understanding of the action to walk, what sort of arguments might you need to complete the action? It's now open.
It depends, right? Walk can either be something you just do without specifying where you walk, but it could also be walking to a specific. So it's either
Sorry,
one argument.
you cut out the part. Yeah,
Hmm?
keep going. You cut out, but keep going. You're saying it can be one or two arguments depending on.
So it's either two other person and a place, a destination.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. And so, we have, if we want to kind of give example sentences, it's like, I walked. Maybe you wouldn't always say that. You'd usually specify, like, maybe I walked yesterday or something. But you can imagine a context in which, oh, why are you all sweaty? Oh yeah, I walked. Um, maybe you need a little more context. Anyways, so that's an example of, right, the one argument that you're talking about. And then if you have a place you're walking to, maybe that's two arguments. I walked to school. For simplicity, and because I don't have it set up, we're going to just focus on the one argument case. And what it doesn't have to, you don't have to have an answer for this, but like, what would you imagine is the type of this argument? If you were to say that there is a one argument verb walk, what is the type of its single argument? Anyone? Subject. We'll get to subjects, but subject is more like, I can, yeah, yeah, you could say, from the way I asked that question, I think that's a fair response. Unfortunately, it's we're going to talk about subjects later. What I have, which is not necessarily the right answer, right? I'm just trying to get you guys to think about this. Is that we're providing a noun of some kind. a thing that is doing the action of walking. I walk. So we have this one parameter function for our verb walk. Now, the verb like, does anyone else, well, or I don't, it could be whoever. What do you think the parameters, the arguments look like for this verb? Anyone? Anyone? We'll see how long I'm comfortable waiting in silence. Please?
We're talking about like here.
Yep. Verb like, what would you say its signature is with respect to like its parameters or arguments?
Well, we definitely need two, and I'd guess they'd both be nouns.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, something that is liking something else.
Yep. Exactly. Well, yeah, that's what I have. And again, the type is, well, not the type is less important. It was just trying to get um uh the CS analogy. You could say that this is a subject and an object based on how I frame the question, right? But yeah, we need two participants, two arguments in this verb for it to have a completed action. Now, what about eat? Verb eat.
Well, you could have two, like
Mm-hmm.
I eat bread, or you could
Mm-hmm.
just have one and say I eat, but that's kind of not very useful.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by useful?
Well, it doesn't convey as much information. It's
That's
just
true.
more basic.
Yep. Yeah, what we usually find with some of those constructions is we need to construct an appropriate context. Um, so like, maybe I would say, hey, what do you like to do? What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? In that case, it would be a lot easier to say I eat because there's a context in which that amount of information is conveyed. I like that you were giving examples because we're very concerned with examples of sentences where you might say something. You should definitely, I encourage this because that's kind of essentially the data that we're examining when we talk about these things in linguistics. But yeah, there's two cases. So sorry to, was it you 120 Cell who answered that there were two cases for walk, and I said I don't have that answer? Someone. I didn't see who it was. But
That was
um mhm. um so we have a situation where we have two arguments. Again, two nouns. Oh, I see I've actually referred to them as subject and object here. Um Forgot I did that. But yeah, the idea being that it's not the same if it's not equivalent to say I ate the apple and the apple ate me. Those mean two different things. So this is the one case. Yes, that's Tuswap has said, I will refrain from answering questions since I know where this is going. What I will say is that if we've gone like a minute and I've asked the question and no one has answered, I think you're totally allowed to answer the question. Um, I've had a couple
Okay, will do.
professors. I had a couple. This is a strategy I learned from one of my professors who would, like play the game of how long you can wait to see before someone will answer the question. So this is the two argument case. You can also have the one argument case, as you said, and maybe this is a little weirder. It doesn't have as much information, but you can construct a context in which this would be appropriate to say. So I hope this kind of gives you an idea of the starting point of what we're talking about when we say that verbs have arguments that relate that verb to its the participants in the action. So we've mentioned subjects and objects. I mean, I had them in the signatures there for the parameters. The thing is that turns out these are not like as rigorously defined as we would like the term subject and object. A lot of evidence here for whether we should use, like, for the fact that it's maybe not as rigorous as we might think, comes from a lot of work on ergative languages. We'll talk about ergativity, but there are some languages for which it doesn't really make sense to talk about a subject because you don't really have one argument or position in your clause that behaves in all the ways that a subject does in English, for example. So essentially the notion of a subject is very much based in these Indo-European grammatical traditions that kind of cause us a headache when we try and translate to the cross-linguistic diversity of the world. So this is an issue that you have sometimes in science, right, where you have a label and you're trying to fit that label to something natural, when really what you should be doing is you should be examining the things that occur naturally, and then the label isn't that important. You're just trying to describe behaviors in the way that things are and are not. So we're gonna avoid, excuse me, the word subject and object, ideally, and use slightly different terminology. First of all, so we have kind of a clean slate in labels, and second, to emphasize that we're really talking about not this grammatical tradition from certain languages as a subject, but that we're talking about these notions of transitivity and semantics. Semantics being essentially meaning, and then transitivity we'll talk about now. So this is probably terminology that you've heard before. This is as far as like kind of traditional grammatical terminology. This is like fine. We can use this in linguistics, right? If you have an intransitive verb that has only one argument, in English, I run, I fall, we just have this subject, although again, be careful of the term subject. In French, you can have the same thing, je cours, je tombe. You can, if you speak any other languages, I'm sure you can think of some examples. You just have this one argument that is being related to the action. Transitive verbs have more than one argument. We divide these into two types. The transitive verbs are monotransitive. They have two arguments. I, like you, I eat the apple. You can see I've highlighted the arguments in bold. In French as well, je t'aime, je mange la pomme. That French example is a little weirder because you have the second argument is in a different position depending on the verb, but that's not really relevant to the key point. And then ditransitive verbs have three arguments. So I give the apple to you. There's someone who's doing the action, something to be given, and someone who's receiving the gift. Same thing in French, te donne la pomme. For now, we're going to ignore ditransitives because that's a bit more complicated and not necessary. So when I say a transitive verb, just think monotransitive. We were going to be thinking about verbs with one argument or verbs with two arguments. Does this all make sense? Please ask questions again. I like how in French you can just do je te la donne and put them all together. It is nice, yes. I see someone unmuted.
Is it actually technically ditransitive in English, or is it just a translation of the French one?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Is it actually technically ditransitive, or are we just saying I give the apple is one clause and then it has an additional, or it's like part of a bigger clause that has two in it?
Based on most, I think all of the definitions of clause that I'm familiar with, I wouldn't say so. There is pretty good evidence that this is all, when you have these ditransitives, we do have just one clause and one verb that's related to all these arguments. I don't know if you're maybe asking something else, but does that answer that?
I think it does.
Okay, great. Yes, it is nice to have a bunch of clinics at the front of your verb in French. When you study linguistics, you start thinking a lot more about the way people say things and the way you say things. And ever since I took those courses, I think I'll be speaking to my family or something, and I'll be like, "Wow, that was really nice. I just had like a whole I just put that all at the front of the verb, and it's very pleasing." So yes, you are right, Jay. I agree that it is nice. Okay, anything else? I need some water. Okay, so I told you that subjects are kind of a problematic term. Not maybe problematic is not the word. They cause difficulties sometimes. So this terminology that we're going to be using is based on, first and foremost, transitivity class. So if you have an intransitive verb, like I run, there's one argument. We are going to refer to that argument as the subject. So this is confusing. Yes, I admit, because I just said, subjects are not like real or whatever. We don't like the word subject, but we're going to be using the word subject. I'm going to do my best to refer to this as intransitive subject, just to be clearly disambiguated and to remind you that we're talking about this specific thing, because in normal sense, a subject can also be an intransitive verb. We only care about the intransitive subject. So this, I run, this is the intransitive subject, and that's the only case that we're going to be focusing on that term. When you have a transitive verb, you have two arguments, of course, as we've been talking about. We're going to call these the agent and the patient, A and P for short. And how we disambiguate which is which is based on the semantics of the verb, the meaning of the verb. The agent corresponds to the more active participant. So if you think of verbs as something that is done, to be done, the agent is the doer. And the patient is going to be kind of the second argument that's less active. So in I eat the apple, because we can think if you think about the meaning of I eat the apple, I am the agent because I am doing the action of eating in some way. I'm more active, and the apple is just the patient, the recipient of that action that I am doing. So these three labels are going to be kind of the core of our exploration of this concept of alignment. So intransitive subject, transitive agent, transitive patient. Got it? And if you don't, we have some exercises. Okay, learning check. Can you label we've got a bunch of verbs with their arguments in these sentences. Can you label the arguments of the verb according to whether they are intransitive subject, transitive agent, or transitive patient? Starting with the boy runs. Anyone?
I guess I'll answer if nobody else. Oh,
Yes.
120, you want to take it?
No, go ahead.
Great. So I guess the boy would be an intransitive subject.
Yep. So we're gonna put an S there. S there. Excuse me. I need to discuss amongst yourselves the next one while I drink some more water.
Well,
That's a
the
transitive
man
verb,
is
so
the man is the agent and the dog is the patient.
Yep.
And this is this will be more relevant later, but I'll emphasize again that whether it's which one is which, you should be thinking about the action itself and not necessarily, oh, the man is at the front, and this is like an agent at the front. Yeah, the man is the one doing the action of liking, there he is the agent. The rock hit the tree.
Same thing.
Yeah, same.
Like in the
which?
same order again. The rock is the
Okay,
agent and
okay.
the tree is the patient.
I promise I'm not being facetious. I'm just
Same as the first
I-
one. For the ground,
ground
is
shakes.
the subject, the
Ground is the subject.
intransitive.
Okay. And this last one?
It's going to be transitive, but is it reversed this time?
You tell me. Explain your reasoning.
Because the thief is doing the doing. Like it's the passive voice instead of the active voice. So it's
Yep.
or at
So
least
the
that's
thief.
like,
Yep.
yeah.
I don't
You
know
could
if
also think
doing
of
the
it as like
stealing.
the painting doing the action of existing or like being, right?
that's a possibility, and we may come back to that. But for now,
I mean, you could kind of think of it as doing the active thing of being in the state of having
Yeah.
been stolen, but
Yeah.
that doesn't quite.
if you treat was as the verb, you can make more like these are all perfectly, to be clear, these are all perfectly reasonable thoughts. I'm pretty sure that there are some formal analyses of these constructions where that you have that in some sense, maybe not. I'm not really familiar. For simplicity, of course, we're going to go back to that initial thing you noted, that just the thief is the one doing the action of stealing. So in that sense, there's a more active participant, and so it's the agent, and the painting is the patient. You mentioned this is a passive voice construction. We'll come back to voice, but I put this example here mostly to emphasize the fact that, we're really concerned about the meaning here when we assign these labels. It's not just, it's at the front, and therefore it is the agent. Because this is a fun counterexample. So yeah, good catch. And we can talk more about those alternative possibilities later on, maybe. Okay. Yes, we'll come back. Thank you, past me. So the reason we have these labels as opposed to subject and object is, as I kind of mentioned, is more for like the cross-linguistic setting to generalize over all languages. But for now, we're just going to talk about English to kind of export our senses to the eventual cross-linguistic setting. So we can put in these annotations that you guys have all figured out for the S, A, and P. And what we can notice in English is that when we have an intransitive subject and a transitive agent, and a pronoun has different case forms, the transitive subject and the transitive agent have the same form. So we use I for both the transitive subject and the transitive agent, this I pronoun. But if the first person singular is in the patient form, it receives a different form. We don't say you like I in standard English. You say you like me. So we can abstract this away one more time, and this is the final abstraction to kind of delve into the deeper world that we're talking about. But generally what we're seeing is that when we divide these things out by transitivity and by semantic role, that in English at least, the intransitive subject and the transitive agent form a class in terms of the case of your pronoun, what form of your pronoun you use, and the patient, the transitive patient receives a different form, which we're just representing with this Euler diagram. Does this kind of diagram make sense to people? Basis for grouping these? I saw you unmute, but I didn't hear anything. Oh, nothing. Cannot hear you.
Is this just as far as like the words we use, as opposed to like something deeper about the meaning?
Can you sorry, say it again?
Like for the agent and the subject, or the is it just the same as in we use I for both as opposed to me? Does that
Yes.
actually mean something more about the information conveyed, or is it just the word?
You're asking whether the usage of I versus me is saying something other than the argument structure? Or I don't know if we've talked about arguments. Whether it's
I think
saying something.
to arrive at this diagram from some deeper analysis beyond just the words I and me. And I think in this case, the answer is no. It was just the words I and me that led us to this conclusion.
Yes, it was in this case. Yes, just the words I and me. So is that kind of what
Okay,
you were
yeah.
asking? Yeah.
Like it's not anything more about like how we use subject and it's just what the pronouns happen to be in English.
Yes. Although in English you can go and you can look at a bunch more. You can do a bunch more diagnostics, basically. You can look at the behavior of these arguments, and you will come to the same conclusion again, usually. So, for example, if we go back, we see that the transitive subject and, sorry, I did it. Ignore that. The intransitive subject and the transitive agent always come before the verb, right? We see that. It's before the verb, and then the transitive patient comes after the verb. So that's another way in which we can derive this, is that the behavior of word order leads us to conclude that S and A are alike and P is doing something different. But yes, in this case, this is just what we're basing it on. But I guess you can arrive at this thing a lot of different ways, and this is going to make why we have this abstraction is going to make a lot more sense once we start talking about other languages. Is that more clear?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Okay. And we have names for these groupings. If you've studied Latin, for example, when you have a grouping of S and A, we have the label nominative, and when you have just a P on its own, call that accusative. These are just labels, but if you have studied a language with the grammatical tradition that uses these terms, this kind of might provide another perspective into what we're doing here. So we have this abstraction. Now we can play with it. I don't really remember what the conclusion was of the what is math talk that had happened like a month ago, but I do have the impression that it's fun. A big part of math is playing with abstractions. Is this a reasonable statement?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Mathematician approved. So, maybe you can maybe you want to stop thinking about this as representing language some way. You just have a bunch of different items. Maybe you think of these as items. What are the different ways you can group them? Maybe you can think of this as taking different subsets of a larger set of items. When you look at these groups of S, A, and P, are there other ways that you can think about organizing them?
You could also make no distinction at all and always use I.
Yep. So I'm going to just draw on here for a moment. So yeah, we could make no distinction and just, something like this, where everything is the same all the time, and we don't really care to distinguish. Anything else? More circles.
I'll add one. Group the S with the P and leave the A alone.
Great, great. You guys get to, while you admire my PowerPoint skills, definitely keep thinking. Ah,
I mean, you could just, circle A and P as separate, but I don't know if that really does much logically.
don't
'Cause
don't
having-
think about the logic. Just go for
Okay,
it.
sure. Circle A and P, and then leave the S alone, or in its own little circle.
Hold on,
And
I still
then
need to
another
finish
partition
this.
would be to just put them all in their own circles.
You guys are on fire now. Gotta wait a little for me. I'll stop worrying about the colors after this, but okay. So what was the first one that we said?
A and P together.
A and P together. And then that would mean that we just have this lonely little S all the way out here. Okay, I don't know if you can see that color. I don't know why that's the default color. And then what was the other one?
All individually.
All individually, thank you. Oh boy, my window is really freaking out. Anything else you can think of? I didn't like choose the number of things to be like the number of answers that I can think of. If you can think of another one, shout it out. The empty set is a subset of any set, right? This means we can allocate unused words for no reason. Allocate unused. I kind of see what you're saying with the first part, but it doesn't have to have a practical application. That's part of the fun, right? But like I can imagine you're saying we're just leaving these kind of ungrouped, and that maybe has some sort of esoteric interpretation in the real data. But like, what do you mean by allocating unused words? Because it seems like you maybe have an
I just
interpretation.
meant basically just circle like nothing, and
Yeah.
make a word that doesn't like properly fit any of them, so it doesn't really make sense to use, but exists.
So
The sole
we can
purpose of existing.
so like it's so it's like kind of like this. So because it doesn't make sense, we might as well have nothing.
Sure.
Okay, interesting. That would be like the give up analysis, where it seems like it's really complicated, so we're just gonna say that there's no alignment. Anything else? There may be. I'm not really keeping track of. So if you don't have any other ideas, then we can
I
go.
guess there could be more semantic categories than just agent and patient, right? Like, what if they're, for
Yep.
example, exactly equally active or something, and then we have a separate word for that.
Yep. Yep. So maybe we can say, we can't really decide who's the agent and the patient. They're both equally active, so we have two agents. Yeah, that's also possible, and then we would do that. Yeah, let's try that.
Doesn't English technically it's not actually, it's more subject and object, which aren't necessarily the same as agent and patient. It's not.
Keep talking.
I may or may not be the agent. I was eaten by the apple. something that doesn't quite make sense. But
Yes, yeah. So you're saying that in I was eaten by the apple, that I is this nominative form, but it's also the patient.
yeah, so it doesn't.
Yeah.
The subject and usually the agent form doesn't always have to be the agent. Like it's kind
Yes.
of fake.
You are right. There are two things I will say in response to this. The first is that a lot of things, weird things happen when you introduce voice. Because that is a voice alternation, passivization, and we can talk about that later though. The second thing I will say is that I am using English here because we're speaking English as this example of a nominative accusative language, but if you really dig down into some parts of the iceberg, if you will, it you may that analysis doesn't always hold up for independent reasons. One thing that English is really, well, maybe I shouldn't frame it that way. When you have a fragment, so let's say I ask a question, I say like, "Hey, who wants to answer all of my questions?" And maybe one of you says me. When you say me, in response to that's kind of a fragment, right? You're expressing the pronoun without a sentence or a clause inside of it, and use the form me, which is the accusative. This is actually kind of unusual, or at least unexpected from certain theories of these structures, because the accusative only really exists in the context of another argument, right? Because in an intransitive sentence, we have I, and me only occurs when you also have an I there. So why does I occur all of a sudden when you have no verb or no arguments? So this is a very small taste of kind of how the expression of English as a nominative accusative language is a little odd in some ways. But that's kind of like 3 steps kind of beyond which I'm happy to talk about, but is probably not helpful for like a path of exploration. So yeah, we can talk. It's obviously everything is much more complicated than this, and I would love to talk about that. But maybe remind me later. That sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about kind of, so we've been basically abstracting and drawing circles on and making sets. Do you guys want me to talk about like what the like linguistic interpretations of this, if we take the abstraction back down to the data, what this might look like? Is that something of interest, or do you want to just keep going?
Well, if you have examples in languages that actually work like that would be cool to see.
I do have examples, but it doesn't. Yeah, if I have examples, it's not necessarily in the order that we were talking about. So that's all right. We can do that. Okay. So yeah, let's keep going. So as I'm sure 2Swap has predicted, the first permutation, is that a permutation? No, this is not a permutation. What's the word for combination? NCR? I don't know. I'm bad at combinatorics. When you have the S and P grouped together and the A is excluded, this is referred to as an ergative absolutive alignment. Has anyone heard these words before? I'm just curious.
Yep.
Yep.
I've heard it before.
Yep. Yep. Anyone else? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And do you? Actually, that's not a good question. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. I don't know where you've heard of it or what context or what meaning you associate it, but this is the label that we apply to this alignment. And I'll take a moment also to say here that you can maybe start to see why we call it alignment. the alignment is these circles that we're drawing, right? Languages have these arguments, S, A, and P, as just a property of language, and alignment is the task of, or it's not the task, the description of how these different arguments pattern together or pattern separately. And this is, kind of what we want in science, is like we have certain things, and certain things behave the same way and certain things behave differently, and how do we capture the fact that some things appear to behave the same and some people appear to behave differently, but then in different languages that's not always the case. So this, when I say alignment, now you can think of like these little bubbles. Okay, what does this mean? We have S and P grouped together with A on its own. What does this look like in a language? Take this back down from the abstraction. We can talk about case marking, like we were talking about with English pronouns. These examples are from Gerbil, which is a Pama-Nyungan language spoken in Australia. I believe it is. Yes, it is still spoken. In this language, ergative arguments are case marked and absolutive arguments are unmarked. And we said ergative absolutive alignment. These are referring to the two types of arguments in the same way that a nominative accusative alignment is a nominative argument, which is S and A, and an accusative alignment, which is P. We can talk about the ergative argument and the absolutive argument. So maybe just helpful to look at these examples. Here I have a intransitive sentence. So we have an intransitive subject in the sentence father returned. Father, this word father, nguma, is unmarked. It doesn't have any case marking. So it's absolutive. This is very common in languages. If you have overt case marking, like a suffix, say, a case suffix for only one case, it's almost always going to be the absolutive or the nominative, for reasons that are interesting and we can maybe talk about, but this is expected, basically. So intransitive subject, father, absolutive, unmarked absolutive case. This is just the noun. Transitive sentence, mother saw father. Mother is the one doing the seeing, so that's your agent. And you'll see that in this case, there is a case suffix. This ngu, yabungu, is mother ergative. This suffix only appears to mark the agent of a transitive verb. It doesn't appear to mark other arguments. You can see with the patient, right? Father is the patient, the one being seen. Again, we have this nguma form with no case suffix, so we say it's unmarked absolutive. And right, this may be interesting if you're coming from a nominative accusative background where you're like, oh, like this is why we might not want a term subject, because implicitly in a language like English, subject refers to intransitive subject and transitive agent, which basically behave the same way in most parts of English grammar, but there are many languages where that's not at all the case. Where, maybe you might ask someone who speaks Gerbil, like, about this, and they'd be like, why are you assuming that the subject and the agent are the same? Clearly it's the subject and the patient that are one thing. Obviously it wouldn't exactly go like this, but hopefully you can start to get an idea that this is just a different way of doing things. Does this interpretation of the data make sense?
Yeah. And there was something you said that I found interesting. You said that it's always absolutive or nominative that's marked, which is actually
unmarked.
Oh, unmarked. Right. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
No. Please, you can ask something based on something that I didn't say. I would be interested to what you were saying.
No, I just mixed up the words. I thought it was ergative and nominative that were marked, but like you said, it was absolutive, but I thought it was ergative because I mixed them up. Anyway.
And you thought that hypothetical case might have been interesting because, like, those both involve the agent, and that suggests the agent is like special in some way?
It was surprising to me because I thought, I would have guessed that the arced ones are the ones that involve the intransitive
Yes,
subject, which is
that is
actually the case. That's not actually surprising. So yeah.
that is the case. Yes. And it's not surprising and interesting. Hold on, people are pinging me. Oh, this is Fire, who is maybe gonna join. I don't know. Oh no, not this very minute. Okay, I'll try to be there in less than 20 minutes. Okay. Maybe he'll join. We'll see. He's been waiting for this talk for a month, so I do feel a little bad that he's not here, but the time was there. Anyways. So yes, nominative absolutive, yes, it is the one that is the and that is a helpful way of remembering it. The one that will be the intransitive subject is the one that is unmarked. There are a couple languages that people have argued have, or that seem to have, the opposite, where you only have a suffix marking nominative and the accusative doesn't have a suffix, or something with like only absolutive has a suffix. But there are then analyses that argue that this is not actually the case. That this is like something else is going on. It's being confused by deeper factors. And when you really look at it, that this is actually, these marked nominative languages are actually ergative absolutive. So if you want to, if you are of a certain persuasion in the field of linguistics, you want to be able to say that this holds in general, that there are no languages that mark the absolutive and not the ergative. Sorry, checking something. Subject patient group right is this to avoid subjects having to be marked. So when we come to the why of why something happens, that's a little more finicky, right? Because I can't really tell you why something happens. We don't really. Maybe in 200 years we'll have a kind of a understanding of how language actually works. But when most of what we do when we are describing language and analyzing language, I say we as like in linguistics in general, we're working with data that is produced by a black box. That's one way of thinking about it. Presumably, brains do something with language in certain ways for some reason. Hopefully that would be a logical reason, because maybe we want to hope that we have logical brains. But you can't really say that without maybe peering into the brain. So when you ask a why question like that, all I can give you is like, we have hypotheses as to why this might happen, but it's difficult to answer those when we're only working indirectly with language. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? It's kind of a more of a metaphysical question, or like how we are doing science. So if we try to answer the question right, we could hypothesize that there is what we would maybe see a functional pressure. There's a functional pressure to not have to do extra stuff with intransitive subjects, because there's a lot of sentences that don't have intransitive subjects. So if you can get away with not doing extra stuff on all those sentences, then that's, maybe more helpful. That's a more of a functional explanation, which is that languages behave in certain ways as a result of kind of functional pressures from the environments that they're spoken. This is exaggerating, and this is not my background. I'm actually I come from a generative background, which is where when you hypothesize as to why language might behave a certain way, it's more we want to create a model that can generate all possible grammatical sentences in all given languages with the simplest mechanism. In that case, the why is something more like the mechanisms by which ergative and accusative case arise must only be present in transitive clauses. There's one theory of case that says that basically ergative and accusative are dependent and can only be assigned in the presence of another noun. And somehow that dependency creates more substance that, is the reason why it's marked. This is very kind of 3 steps ahead and to the side. So it's okay if that kind of doesn't make sense. I'm also saying some things wrong, but that's another approach to a why question, like a hypothesis of why this thing that we see in language might be the case. That was a lot of speaking. Does anyone have anything to say?
I think what you said first made the most sense to me, that it's a black box, and what the brain actually does is probably really complicated in some ways.
Yep.
And we can make simply models of that generate the same structure, but those might not actually be how the brain does it, right?
Yep.
So I wouldn't really call that an answer to the why question.
Yep. And that's why I talk about like hypotheses, because that's all they can be, essentially. And my understanding is maybe you have this in like physics as well. Like I don't like if you ask a physicist like why does the ball go that way when I throw it? Like you could say gravity, but that's not necessarily like the answer. It's like there's it could be something I don't know. I don't know where I was going with this.
It's like you're trying to answer a question about cause and effect with a model, I think
Yeah.
is kind of the analogy.
Yeah. And there are different models that might behave similarly in some cases and different in other cases. Like as with the example of the gravity, right? You can have, if I say gravity, then maybe that works for by explaining using a model in that case. But in some cases, but in general relativity, gravity is not like a thing in the same way, right? It's like a consequence of the distribution of matter and energy. So then from that perspective, maybe when you point at that and say gravity, maybe a physicist would want to say, well, we hypothesized that the ball would move in this way because of this model, but I can't tell you for certain. So that's basically what I'm doing here to speak for the physicists. Okay, that was a lot. I think we can keep moving. So we've been talking about case, which is, just essentially the alignment of nouns. I kind of didn't really define case, but that's one way you can think about it. We can get alignment in something other than case. Let's talk about agreement. This is data from Hinok. I don't have a phonology reference on hand. A Northeast Caucasian language spoken in Russia. The verb agrees in noun class / gender with the absolutive argument. So a lot of things there, right? Does the concept of verbal agreement kind of make sense to everyone? It exists to some extent in English and in a lot of languages.
I'm going to make the assumption that there's probably people who don't know what that is. And just to give a quick primer, the idea is that basically you'll modify the verb like in some way to reflect the fact that either the subject or something else is maybe plural in number or like masculine in gender or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, so the example in English is that if verbs agree with a nominative argument, so if I have an intransitive sentence, I say I run, you run, he runs, that S suffix, that indicates that your subject is third person singular. So that's agreement, because it's agreeing with a quality of something else in the clause. In this case, it's person and number. In Hinok here, what we're dealing with is gender, noun, class, basically the kind of thing. Gender is kind of a proxy, like sociological gender is kind of a proxy for this, but it can also mean just kind of noun, in the same way that in French, like whether something is a masculine or feminine gender doesn't really mean that it's a man or a woman. It just means that you have kind of these things are type A and these things are type B. So in Hinok, you have nouns are implicitly just, you're going to know that a noun comes in one of 4 classes. Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4. So in this sentence here, when the snake disappeared, we have this intransitive subject snake, picore, and you can see that this is Class 3. I've just kind of, you can trust me that snake is Class 3 in this language. And this is the verb, leave, okay. And it comes with this b suffix, this b. This b is an agreement prefix in, I think I said suffix, is an agreement prefix in the same way that s is an agreement suffix in English, broadly speaking. And this b is telling you that the intransitive subject in this case is of class 3. So you can imagine if we swap out snake with something of class 2, that this prefix would then change to whatever the class 2 marker is in this language. Now, if this were English, we would expect that when you take it to a transitive clause, that it would be the agent, because that agrees, because this is what happens in English. When you say, I hit you, no, I hit her, you hit her, she hits her, it's the agent that determines that agreement, right? That s suffix only shows up when the agent in the transitive clause is third person singular. This is not the case because we're dealing with an absolutive alignment here, and the verb agrees with the absolutive argument. So we have our transitive clause. The man made much profit, right? Man is the agent. Maybe it's like class 1 or 2. I don't know, maybe class 1. I feel like that would make sense in like a patriarchal setting of some kind. I don't know. From the analysis, I mean, not like the culture. So, man, maybe class 1. And then the patient, this benefit or profit, that's class 3. Again, you can just trust me because I put that there. This Roman numeral 3 on benefit, class 3. The verb do, again, has this be suffix that marks class 3. But because we know that the class 3 argument is the patient and not the agent, that the patient is being agreed with. So if the patient and subject are both being agreed with, that means the absolutive argument is being agreed with, and we have this SP grouping in the Euler diagram that I've maintained on the right. Does this data make sense?
Yeah. Does it ever happen that a language is ergative absolutive with respect to a verb agreement, but nominative accusative with respect to pronouns?
Yes, and that is exactly the right question to be asking. This is a very good question. This is like, this is the thing you want to be wondering when you see stuff like this. The answer is yes. This language is not an example because, as you see, we actually have this ergative case suffix on man. So there's ergative absolutive on both case marking and verbal agreement are ergative absolutive. I don't know any examples off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that there are languages, like you said, that are absolutive in verbal agreement and accusative in case marking. Interestingly, I read this somewhere, so don't quote me on this because I may be misremembering. But I think that there's a kind of observation/prediction that you have languages that are absolutive in verbal agreement, but nominative in case marking, but not the other way around. I think. No, wait. Yes, yes. The prediction, there is this kind of asymmetry that people have noticed, that some people are saying is we should that there should be no languages with accusative agreement and ergative case marking. So that's just
Interesting.
something to think about. Yeah. I don't know whether it's how much it's holding up, but that's another kind of generalization that's kind of neat. Sometimes the pronoun doesn't determine the agreement. You mean by pronoun? Or is this in reference to English or the examples here?
I mean, a reference to the like edge case languages where it's one's ergative absolutive and the other's nominative accusative, right? Because one of those is determining like what pronoun you would use, and the other would determine what agreement you use.
Yes, yes.
Because
yes, yeah.
like in French, you have like the little table with the verb endings, and usually it's like je, tu, il, elle. So sometimes
Oh, I see what you're saying.
that wouldn't line up.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wouldn't I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I guess if you were kind of creating this agreement table, you wouldn't maybe want to put that pronoun there because it wouldn't necessarily align. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, in that case, and I mean, in that case, this is bad for teaching grammars, but in descriptive grammars and linguistics, you would just say first person singular, first person dual, that sort of thing. But yeah, interesting. Okay, so when we talk about ergative absolutive alignment, we can also talk about agreement. It doesn't have to be just the case. Does that make sense to everyone? And this is kind of, you guys have foreshadowed very well this slide that I have here, which is, we saw that Dribble has ergative absolute alignment of case on its nouns. Hinnock has ergative absolute alignment of its verbal agreement. Alignment, when you talk about alignment, we want to be talking about structures, not necessarily languages. It is true that you can have a lot of languages that tend towards one alignment overall. So for example, English has nominative accusative in both agreement and case. You saw that Hinnock had that ergative marker on as well. So it has ergative absolutive case and agreement. Yeah, I have English here. Word order also. You could imagine a language that doesn't have case or agreement, but is still aligned with respect to word order. So for example, if you have a language that has English, we say, maybe that'll be too confusing. No, I shouldn't use that terminology. But if you have a language that has absolutive verb order, you can imagine that, say, you have subject and then the verb, I run. Then maybe you're going to have, if your subject comes before the verb, maybe your patient is going to come before the verb if it's absolutive. So him see me, him see I, or something like that. I don't know, where the patient comes before to align with the subject. So it really is about the structure, not necessarily the language. And
It would be he, right? Because it's the same type as the intransitive. If it's
yes,
I, yeah.
yes, although it could be that in this toy example that this English prime example has ergative absolutive word order, but nominative accusative case alignment. I don't know if there are languages that behave like that, and you're right, although that's another possibility to consider. Yeah, so English is pretty robustly nominative accusative, but you can also find examples like this. If you look at the pair of sentences, the water boiled, and I boiled the water. If you think about the semantics of what's going on, in the first sentence, the water is, you can think of in both of these contexts, you can think of water is boiling. Like water is on the stove and it's coming to a boil, regardless of whether I am making it do it, whether I'm there as a causer of the action, the water's role in some way is still the same. So you'll notice that this is an intransitive subject and a transitive patient patterned together. So this is actually kind of an absolutive pattern. And these verbs in English are sometimes referred to as ergative. If you go on Wiktionary, you'll see that these verbs have a label that says ergative. this is part of a broader, it's called an equative causative alternation. So other verbs that do this are sink, the ship sank, I sank the ship. Freeze, the water froze, I froze the water. Where when you have a subject, you have this encodative, meaning that the thing is undergoing the process, and when you add an agent, that agent causes the process, and the thing that was the subject is now the patient. So even though English is mostly nominative accusative, you do get stuff like this. The suffix e, like in employee, also behaves ergatively. If you say someone, I'm a retiree, that means you're someone, I retired. That's the subject. But an employee is not someone who employs people, it's someone who is employed. It's the patient, not the agent. So in this case, again, you have the intransitive subject patterns with the transitive patient, which is again an ergative absolutive pattern.
Couldn't you think of that as saying I was retired by the company or something? Or...
Yes, but in I was retired, this is a passive construction, right? In which we know in English that passives promote your patient to agent status.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the same then as I was employed, right? So then it wouldn't be changing.
What do you mean?
Like if we interpret the retiree as someone who was retired, who was the patient in that interaction.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, I guess then you just have to make what I would have to what the argument that I have to make is that I would have to make, because I'm not like married to this argument, is that retiring, retiring can serve as an intransitive verb, whereas employing can't necessarily. Like, what does it mean? Like, I employ.
Yeah, actually, retired is one of those encodative
It is.
verbs, like
It is. Yeah.
you mentioned, right?
Yeah, which is interesting. I don't know if that's related, but I think that I can maybe think of a better example, but I think you get the idea. So it is, you can say, Hinnock is an ergative absolutive language. Maybe. Like, no one's going to stop you, but be a little careful when you apply that, because it's not uniform, and it's more of a spectrum. For a language, it's more of a spectrum overall with, how far you're going to place your structures. Oh, we have some more alignment. Yep. So we're kind of going through the variations of those Venn Euler diagrams that we drew. This is data from Nez Perce, which is a Sahaptian, actually Plateau-Penutian. This may not be the highest level language family. Spoken in the United States. Tripartite is the name given to one of which I believe someone shouted out. What if we just put everything in its own separate bucket? First sentence, we have an intransitive sentence. The man arrived, and here we have the intransitive subject is unmarked, right? We can think of this as nominative or absolutive case. It's some sort of unmarked subject. And then we have a transitive verb. The husband took the woman away. Here, this hum up noun is marked with this ergative im suffix, and woman, the patient, is marked with this na accusative suffix, indicating that these are agent and patient. So now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, like if this is tripartite and everything behaves differently, like why does it make sense to talk about ergative, accusative, nominative? Shouldn't we just call these kind of S, A, and P? And yes, that would probably be less confusing, but it is interesting to note that you can reuse these labels, because it's not necessarily that ergative only exists in the context of absolutive, because you can refer to an ergative case. That is the case that is assigned to the subject of a transitive verb. So even in this language, you don't have absolutive, because P and S are separate. You can see S is here, P is here. if A is in its own little circle, you can still call that ergative in a sense.
Yeah, it
Because
makes sense to reuse ergative and accusative, right? But nominative is different here, so
Yep.
I wouldn't want to reuse that.
Yep, exactly. And I don't know if they have a reason for saying nominative in the source material. But yeah, maybe in this case we would want to call this like, oh, I'm not going to change the slide, but maybe we would want to, it would make sense to call this S or subjective, maybe. I don't know.
Or intransitive, right?
Or intransitive. Yep. Yep. And these are all labels, so they're not crucial to the argument and description of the data, but it is kind of interesting to think about when we create labels, what we're talking about. Okay. Voice. So I promised you would come back to the painting was stolen by the thief. Where when we look at the semantics of the participants, then it seems like the thief is the agent of the action because he's like the one doing stuff. I'm saying he. I guess it could be any gender, but the painting is the less agent of action participant. So, okay, we have this P at the front in the kind of subject position. So this kind of looks, absolutive. And I mean, maybe you could say that this is absolutive somehow. The question is just then what the implications are of that, and that's kind of a different story. Really, this is what we're seeing here is an instantiation of English passive voice, which is a voice alternation. Voice is kind of a related concept to alignment, where most languages have voice constructions, which basically allow you to permute your basic argument structure of the verb and move things around. So the example of English, what an English passive does is it essentially, if you think about a basic transitive structure in English as a verb P, a passive deletes the A and promotes the P to this subject position. Here I'm talking about a transitive subject in the kind of English grammatical sense, because it's still not really the patient, right? It's still not really the agent. It is the patient, but structurally, as someone pointed out in terms of case, in the passive, you say I was stolen by the thief, even though I am the patient, I'm getting this nominative case. So it gets a little finicky with how you're going to define your alignment with respect to voice alternations, because it's a little more language internal, basically. Like there does seem to be this subject position in English that requires nominative case that sometimes takes an accusative argument depending on the voice alternation. So it's a little more like language to language basis. But yeah, this is like basically I think every language is going to have some sort of voice construction, which let you permute basic argument structure. Not all languages have all ones. Some are more common in certain alignments. So we have a passive. Anti-passives basically do the opposite of a passive. They delete the P of a transitive. They delete the transitive patient. And I mean, you can maybe think of promoting the transitive agent to subject position. That makes more sense in an ergative language where your patient might have this privileged subject position, but it doesn't have to be in an ergative language. So an example in English would be, let's say I have the sentence, I destroyed the vase. A anti-passive like situation would be I did some destroying, where I've removed my patient and I've just kind of incorporated just me as the agent into the doing without kind of worrying about the fact that destroy is usually a transitive verb, and it is a little weirder to use that intransitively. I destroy, like it's a little more suspect. Causative. A lot of languages will let you just causativize verbs and turn the example from the water boiled, I boil the water. That second one is a causative. It's not really, it's more of a property of the verb itself than of something we're doing to it, but you could still maybe think of that as a voice alternation. And you get some other stuff that are maybe more language specific. Mayan languages have this agent voice construction. Algonquian languages have an inverse voice, etc., etc. This really is it's a little less generalizable from language to language. And voice frequently interacts with alignment, which we'll see in the next slide. But for now, is that kind of the way that voice does the idea of voice as distinct from alignment make sense? Why I'm putting it aside.
Yeah.
Okay. I was told I had to include a slide on this. So why we just there we go. I was told I had to include a slide on this. I hope this pleases you too, Swap. Austronesian alignment is kind of confusing to me. I'm just kind of going to be repeating words, but I don't quite understand what's going on. So definitely feel free to jump in if you feel like I'm saying something wrong. But there's more. It's kind of like a voice alignment combination, which is why I put it after the voice part. But in a lot of languages, usually Austronesian languages, hence the name. So there's something sometimes called symmetric voice, which is again, which is you could see confusing because it's voice or alignment depending on how you want to call it. Generally, one argument is assign subject. So this is more the English sense. It's like there's a privileged argument that moves to the front, and this is your transitive subject. And then, but this subject can be anything. It can be the agent or the patient or something. The verb then has to tell you what the role of your subject is. So this is a voice. So this is alignment in the sense that it's related to basically how your clause is organized, your arguments are organized, but it's voice in that you can kind of permute it. So for example, in these examples from Indonesian, I have two transitive clauses. The first one means, my child saw that person. The second one also means, my child saw that person. But they're structured a little differently. We can talk about differences in interpretation, but you'll notice that in the first one, this anak saya, which means my child, is at the front. So it's the subject. It's been moved to the front. It's prominent in some way. And then this verb has this me prefix. And that's saying, this subject at the front, that is the agent. So if you look and you say, okay, we have the verb see, we have the agent voice, and our subject is my child, we know that my child is the one seeing because it's the subject and we have the agent voice. Correspondingly, the second sentence, we have orang itu, that person that's been moved to the front as this privileged subject. But we have a different prefix here. We have D, which is the patient voice, and that's telling you that the subject is the patient and not the agent as before. And so, is that the etymology of orangutan? I'm pretty sure, yes. I think it means like forest person or something like that. You can
Yep, that's exactly right.
Great.
Although I think it's Malaysian, not Indonesian. In Indonesian, it would be orang hutan with an H.
Mm-hmm. Although my understanding is that standard Malay and Indonesian are maybe mutually intelligible and very similar.
Yep, for the most part. But yeah, I think specifically in that case, it's Malaysian.
This is a sidebar, but my parents said this funny story where they were at this school where you had to graduate having learned like another one or two languages. And the languages you were allowed to learn, like Cantonese and Mandarin, were classified as one language. So you couldn't learn Cantonese and Mandarin. That would only count as one language, even though those are like mutually unintelligible and very different. But they did count Malay and Indonesian as different languages, even though they're very similar. So if you really wanted to kind of cheap out on the language requirement, what people would do is you would learn maybe Indonesian and then say you knew both and take the test for both and get by like that. Note Malay is not the same thing as Malaysian. Where is could you explain where I went wrong?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the distinction or like the sociolinguistics here, but I think the idea is that so Malay refers to the group of languages that descended from like a one specific branch of Austronesian languages that is in like
Mhm.
the Riau province of Indonesia currently. Um, that was then taken and used as the standard language, which is now used in both Malaysia and Indonesia and has since
Mhm.
diverged in both cases. So usually when you say Malaysian or Indonesian, those refer to the standard languages of those two countries respectively, whereas Malay can either refer to the languages that still are used natively in that original place or the grouping as a whole of all of these languages which descended from them, depending
Mm.
on context possibly. Think that's the idea, but take that with a grain of salt.
Okay,
I'm
thanks for
no expert.
clarifying. That makes
Yeah.
sense from like I see like oh, Ambonese Malay and standard Malaccan Malay is these kind of
Yep.
dialects or separate languages spoken in other parts
Exactly.
of Indonesian.
Yes.
Yep. So okay, sidebar over. Um, this is what we're dealing with here. You always have to put something as a subject, and then the verb tells you what the actual function of your subject is, whether it's an agent or a patient. So these both mean my child saw that person, but there might be you might translate it a little more literally as with a voice alternation. So the first one, my child saw that person, and maybe the second one is something more, that person was seen by my child. Do you have any intuitions on the meaning there?
I would totally if I didn't well, if I hadn't listened to you say this, I would have assumed that this was like a pretty typical like passive
Mm-hmm.
construction, as opposed to something to do with Austronesian alignment.
Hmm.
This feels in nature very similar to like I saw or sorry, my child saw that person and that person was seen by my child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, maybe there's something deeper going on that I haven't realized.
As to
Um,
why this isn't just the passive, you mean?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's an analysis you can do this, and I can't say for certain because
One
I
thing I can say, I know D, the prefix D. I've read about it being used in a different way, and I'm trying to remember exactly like a good example of that. But
so
D does some funny things in other contexts as well.
here's a question: do you think that you could say just orang itu dilihat?
Yeah, that's totally fine. That means like that person was seen, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like was seen.
Yeah, what I was reading is that in other languages you have like a proliferation of voices, so it's like you can also have a circumstantial voice for something that's not an argument, or like maybe a possessor voice. I don't know, but like you get more options where it's a little more difficult to say that this is just kind of we're promoting our patient to subject position, and we're really kind of just choosing one. But maybe it's all. I mean, you can
I
have a
will let
certain
you
level.
know. I feel like I know of an example of where this gets like weirder, like a
Yeah.
really good example, and I will try and think of it and write it in the chat when I come up with it.
Yeah, the other implication of that analysis is that you have to say that meh is doing something non-voice related, presumably, like um that it's just doing something verby or default verby. I don't know. Um, and you can
Yeah. So it's really sorry to nitpick.
go
Not
for it.
important,
No,
but
no, no, no.
yeah. So, but the in most cases it corresponds to formality. Um, I'm arguing with myself on whether anak saya lihat orang itu is grammatical. I'm pretty sure it is. Um, and ma in this case is just an indicator of like a slight increase in formality. However,
Mm,
there are a lot of cases where you are forbidden from adding the ma. um, depending on like a lot of really weird rules. For example, like uh, uh, dia yang melihat orang itu, he saw that person would be incorrect. You can't have the me after the construction that uses yang, which is like the one that did something. Like
Yeah,
he
relativizer.
or, yeah. So like in all of these cases, it's really weird. These ma and d constructions can have some real like quirks to them. So I don't really know.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have any examples from Philippine languages?
I do not, because
In my
I wanted
opinion,
you to be able to check in.
yeah. In my opinion, those are much more clear when it's happening. Um, so I'll try and I don't I hope I get this right, but an example would be um like ako bumili ang libro would be like I bought the book, but there's focus on the book.
Yeah.
And the article there is ang, which is the like one form of uh there are two articles that can refer to the same thing, ang versus nung, and one of them is used to emphasize the noun in question, but it also has to agree with the specific conjugation of the verb. In this case, I said bumili. You could change that to binili, and then it would have to be nang libro. Uh, I might be getting this wrong, but it's much more clear cut where it happens because you can just look at you can look at that article and immediately know which thing is being like associated with which if it's like the highlighted or um
Focused.
I don't know what it's called. The focused noun.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay. Next time I'll do Tagalog.
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think my disambiguation was like I think that you are more familiar. I remember you saying something like you are more familiar with Indonesian than Tagalog. So
I
I'll do
am.
an example. Okay.
Yeah, I am, but I think Indonesian is the harder case to argue for.
Yeah. Well, if we're going all Austronesian, my understanding is a lot of Polynesian languages is totally broken down, and you just have something else going. So from that, technically, there you can't argue it at all. Anyways,
Sorry, can you say that one more time? What did you say?
what
Polynesian languages are completely broken down in what sense?
like
Or do you mean they're like
the
more analytic?
the system here has broken down, and it's a different. Like I think like Fijian just has like ergative alignment with particles.
Yeah, I think that's what I've
Yeah.
heard. Yeah.
So it's like kind of there's just something else going on. So I was making a
Yeah.
joke like, oh, well, if there's a harder case to argue in Austronesian because they're doing something totally different.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the detour.
I want to be here. Base. Alignment splits. So this is kind of a secret option that I was curious if anyone would try, but we can maybe we can overlap our circles when we're drawing our Euler diagrams. Um, this maybe doesn't make sense from the set interpretation that I provided you with, but it makes sense to describe certain phenomena. We mentioned alignment refers to constructions, but a given construction also can have essentially multiple alignments. This may be not the way you want to think about it, but or maybe that's not the most truthful way, but you can think about it as like in one case in this construction you're going to have an alignment that looks like this. In the other case it's going to look more like this. These are examples from Ganyit Geha, which is an Iroquois language spoken in the US and Canada. And it has an active stative split S alignment. Split S, if you think of S as the intransitive subject, you can imagine, okay, we're splitting our S into two categories. I've represented that in this diagram here. And that basically means that when you have an intransitive subject, there's two different ways that you can mark your subject. Active stative refers to the manner in which this distinction is made. So generally active verbs take one and stative verbs take the other, where stative verbs like refer to states. But there's some other languages with different kinds of split S alignments. So there's some languages where you can just use either one on any verb, and that's fine. But in Ganyikeha, it's like one verb each verb will have a type of S marking that you have to use.
So in this case, it depends on the verbs, right? And there's verb
Yep.
classes. Could it also be? Could it also depend on the noun that's in the S position?
Good question. I don't know of any languages that do this in like the strictly like only in the intransitive cases. There are languages where you get that for different kinds of splits, which we can talk about. But I'm not aware in this kind of canonical split S system where it's only the intransitive verbs that kind of alternate that this is the case. So maybe I'll explain a little more kind of what's going on here and we come back to that. So this first intransitive verb, I swim, gadawas. This g prefix represents the first person singular. So this is your subject, and it's in this A form. This is the agent form. And we call this the agent form because this is how transitive agents are marked. So if I were to take a transitive verb like and say, I like the water bottle, I would say gatset danuets, and you would still have that g marking the agent in a transitive verb. This second intransitive verb, I am happy, wagatsanuni, this wag is also marking first person singular, but it's a different form, as you can see that it's g versus wag. This is the patient form. So if I had a transitive verb and we were going to say like the cat likes me, would say the gos waginues. This wag again shows up, but in this case it's saying that it's the patient, so this is why we call this P. But in the intransitive case, either one can mark the subject, and this depends on the verb. Verbs that are more state-like, that correspond maybe to adjectives in English, tend to be patient marked, and active verbs agent marked. But this is there. It's not as clear cut as it might seem. It's complicated. But this is one example of kind of how you can split certain cases apart. Note that when people talk about split alignments, this is usually not what they think about. It's something else which we can talk about. That's just a disclaimer, but this is the one that I have data on hand for, so I chose this. Does this data and kind of the idea of splitting things apart make sense? Okay, and then to come back to your question, yeah, so do I have, okay, this is basically like my last slide with substance. This is just a list of other topics that are relevant and maybe interesting if you want to talk about. But for now, is there kind of that's basically what I have in terms of more presentation style. We can do a little more free-form discussion if you guys want. Does that sound good? Anyone? I'll put the references here also. Oh, in case you're curious, flash the references. Okay, how about this? For another 20 minutes, we can talk about various things. It can be something we've touched about, or it could be something that you can ask me about from this list of things. Think about what you would like to talk about while I go to the bathroom.
How's everybody doing?
Doing good. Seems pretty lonely here for how many people are here.
Yeah. I was driving for a while, unfortunately, so I couldn't really comment on the first half too much. But
It's warm. I think my internet went out a couple of times because of, I think my router is cooking.
should stick it in the freezer.
Anything you missed that you want to ask about? Maybe someone else can explain it.
No, I was paying attention. I just couldn't really like talk and reach over and hit the mic on mute button.
Oh no, I meant Melon Dude because they are.
Oh, sorry.
And
Yes.
no, if you had a question
Yeah.
as well,
I don't know. Let me think about it. Yeah, I missed some stuff, unfortunately.
Any specific terms or anything really? Feel free to just say an incomplete idea.
I'm back.
Hello.
Did you guys
So-
talk about anything?
The weather.
I
Okay.
have a question that's not really one of these subjects, but
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
these are just kind of ideas. You can ask whatever you want.
about how clauses work. Because or like when something counts, like an adverbial phrase, counts as an argument, or does it not? Because you could have something like I give something to you, or I give something in a specific place, right? I mean, that's kind of unnatural, but
Yep.
the I give it in
I
German.
I give you a present in the park. I don't know. That seems like that's
Yeah.
perfect. There's a context like, oh yes, it was your it was yeah, you remember I got you a present for your birthday. I gave it to you in the park.
Yeah. So does the park there count as an argument to the verb?
Good question. So this is what you want in this case is you want a diagnostic. And what that means is it will vary by language, and I don't know. I don't know if this is more of a whether this extends beyond my like the tradition that I was taught in, but so in kind of the generative tradition where you're trying to identify the parts of your model like constituents, without getting too much into the weeds, you basically run certain tests to see how things behave. So in this case, if we wanted to say, is this thing an argument, you would do a let's see what we do. You do do so replacement. So an example with a basic transitive verb. Let's say we have I ate the apple. Let's say we're in a context where I was wondering what you ate, and you had not eaten apple. So like I could ask, did you eat the apple? And you could say, no, I ate the pear. The question is, where can you replace your structure with do or do so? So if I ask you, did you eat the apple? And you say, no, I did so the pear. That's pretty ungrammatical to me. I assume that it would be ungrammatical to the listeners in this call.
Yeah.
And what that kind of says is that we've kind of converged on the idea that for a language internal diagnostic, you can, when you take a do so statement, you have to minimally replace an entire verb and its complement, we say. So the complement is the direct object, basically. So if I asked you, hey, did you eat the apple? You'd say, yes, I did. That did can actually replace the whole eating of the apple, but it can't just replace eat. So based on this, we would want to say that the apple is truly an argument of the verb. And in general, if you run this test over and over again, anytime that you have a bare noun without any preposition following a verb, that always behaves like an object. So we can pretty reliably say that it's an object. Now, you brought up something like in the park. And it is true that some of these prepositional phrases that come with a preposition like in or to behave like arguments. So we had an example at the start. I walked to school. If I ask you like, hey, did you walk to school? And you say, no, I did to the park. That's
Yeah,
ungrammatical
that's
for me.
right.
I don't know if anyone has any different intuitions, but it's wonky. And so from there you would say that okay, this to phrase is a true argument of the verb walk. Now on the other hand, you can think of another verb where to might not be the argument. So what is there a good example?
Well, in the gift giving example, you could say, "Did you give it in the park, or did you give it to me in the park?" And I could say, "No, I did." Wait, no, could you say, "No, I did in the house"?
Well, you want to be so
Yeah.
it's the thing is there's a lot of arguments in that case, so you have to be careful with kind of what you're placing. An easier example would be something monotransitive, so not give. So let's say I eat the apple in school or at home. I can say, hey, or even better, lunch. Okay, eating lunch. I ate lunch. Great, right? Hey, I'll ask you, hey, like, did you eat lunch at school? You could say, no, I did at home. Right? That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So from that we can conclude that, but you can also, to be clear, you can also say, hey, did you eat at school? And I say, yes, I did. That did is replacing everything, including the in. So it's like you have to find out what you can minimally replace, because maximally you can replace things that aren't arguments, as you can see in that case. But the kind of minimal structure that you can replace with this do replacement, that is, by hypothesis, the clause and all its arguments. The verb and all its the verb and its like the low arguments, like the object and the direct object and the indirect object subjects are behave differently because we've seen that they do. So that's the point. Anyways, so what was the original thing we were trying to figure out? Give.
Yeah, giving you the present in the park.
Yeah. So, did you give me the present? Did you give me the present in the park? Yeah, because the thing is
No, I
you
did
would
at
like
home.
the most natural thing in that case is to use a different construction to me. Like, no, it was at home. That's a
Yeah,
different structure, so that doesn't work.
but I think that
So
I did at home works the same way as I did eat the lunch at home, right?
yes. I'm trying to think if there's a better context. That I will say, like, ditransitives are kind of hard to test on this because you have to control for a lot of things. But generally, what we find, like, based on we would not expect we would expect you to be able to do that replacement if you got the right context. And the reason is just we generally see if that were the case, we're in the park where a true argument, that would be there'd be 4 arguments in total, including the subject. The only place we really see that is with, funnily enough, betting verbs. If I say, I bet you $3 that my horse will win, those all pass argumenthood test, is my understanding. We would be here a while testing that, but those are the only ones that really seem to allow.
Sorry, what kind of
Allow
verbs
all.
do you see that?
Say that again. Say that again.
Sorry, what kind of verbs do we see that with? I think my internet is cutting out a little.
Betting, promising. I bet you $3 that my horse will win. So I bet
Ah,
you
okay.
$3 that my horse will win. The better, who you're betting to, the amount you're betting, and what you're betting on. So we would not. So based on that, we probably wouldn't expect the give in the park to not be an argument if we could test it properly. But yeah, so
Would that be called a tritransitive?
I don't know. Probably tritransitive. I don't know. They're pretty rare. I don't know whether they occur like in all languages. But
Okay.
I forget where we came to this. I think that was just the question, right? Like, how do we tell whether it's an argument? And the answer is we do stuff like that.
Yeah.
We run tests.
Is it always we try to replace something? I assume it's not always the do that we replace it with. But...
Yeah, I mean it's going to vary by what you determine as the language internal structure that you're kind of working around. But they're called constituency tests. There's a bunch of others. There's like fragments, so like what you can use as an answer to a question. There's whether you can remove it at all. I mean, that doesn't always work because in English you can usually remove an object and it just takes a different meaning. But these all kind of test slightly different things. So you do have to kind of, it is a bit of a process to kind of run through them.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? Thoughts? How do we feel about kind of this level of linguistics in math club? Like, could I have layered it on more? Were you like, oh, this is so simple, like, or were you like, I think we need to slow down a little and do some more abstractions? How are we feeling? Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and the reason I chose alignment, I think it's interesting. I could have chosen a lot of different things as kind of a baseline, but to me it is an interesting instantiation of this interesting thing that you like get these recurring patterns in all these different languages, and that it's almost more interesting to abstract away from the way that pattern surfaces and to just talk about the patterns themselves. Like the case in the case behaves the same as the verbal agreement. So like, what does that say about the kind of underlying behavior? Yeah. There's some, with this topic, I put hierarchy effects here as well. Hierarchy effects are really interesting because you get similar thing where there's a bunch of different seemingly disparate phenomena that actually, when you look at the behavior, kind of follow similar sets of typologies and rules, but it's very different it's like whether you mark case in these clauses or the type of agreement you get in this case, or whether a sentence is grammatical at all. It's like all these different kind of things that seem to behave in similar ways across these related languages. It was cool hearing about voice because I have not heard it spelled out as clear as you did. Thank you. Anything else? Any questions about the things that I put on this slide? Anything at all? Whatever you want.
What is the geographical distribution?
Yeah.
And Nick does look at.
Yeah. But do you know what tool I'm going to use to look this up?
No.
Okay, then this will be fun. Got this. Okay. This is Walls. There's a couple websites like it, but yes, Walls, or is that fancier one you showed me? Yes. There's also Grand Bank, but Grand Bank is a little more clunky. This is the World Atlas of Linguistic Structures Online, and what these authors did is they basically went through all of these different kind of, you can see it spans, so it's, we have phonology, so consonant inventories, do you have nasal vowels, like do you have tone, but then it's also like morphology, like how much stuff do you put on your verb, like do you have prefixes or suffixes, and then it's like reduplication, and so basically all these different categories, and they map them out for languages across the world. And the cool thing is then you can look at maps. So if I look at alignment here, there's 3 different categories of alignment. There's case for full nouns, there's case for pronouns, and there's verbal agreement. Which one? We can look at multiple, but which one do you want to look at first? Pick
Full
one.
noun.
Full noun. So you see here we have values. So neutral means there's no case marking essentially on full nouns. There's nominative accusative and then nominative accusative with this marked nominative, which we talked about, which is hypothesized to not, like, these are maybe all ergative. Ergative, absolutive, tripartite, and then active and active. This is like the active stative distinction that I was talking about, basically, at a glance. And then we can just look at the distribution on the map and see where things are. So you can see, for example, that English is neutral because, of course, we don't have case on full nouns. Yeah, I can point stuff out. You just look. Here's Nez Perce, right? Tripartite marking on full noun phrases that we saw. We have a bunch of ergative case marking in the Caucasus. This is the same region that we saw that for Hinuk. This is one of the interesting things. You do get some geographical patterns. So case marking itself has certain distributions. So for example, right, there's not as much in Africa and certain parts of the Americas. But in place, so once you do have case marking, some places have more ergativity. So there's a lot in the Caucasus, and there's a lot in Australia, these red dots. And you'll notice that it's...
Interesting.
Yep. And then these, in North Australia, you get less case marking. So there, you can do this with a bunch of other stuff. What we'll have probably more data is person marking. So here, because it's much more common to have agreement than it is to have case. So this is a little less of the kind of neutral zones. Star Trek reference. Neutral, accusative, ergative, active, hierarchical, split. Hierarchical agreement is fun, but it is a bit involved. So you can see that accusative agreement is pretty common in Eurasia. There's these pockets of ergativity in the Caucasus, and this is, of course, Basque. I don't think there's any other notable, but there's some in the Amazon. This is fun. This is Ket, which is a Yeniseian language, and typologically it's very different from all the other Siberian languages. So when you look at Ket in these maps, it always stands out. Active stative. So we saw this is Mohawk. This is Ganyikeha, which we saw has active stative alignment. Yeah, I don't know. Anything interesting you guys notice here? Anything?
Too much to even look at one point in time. I was curious about what I think it might be Hindi. I've always heard it referred to as
Split?
ergative absolutive.
I think that's the case marking though.
Right. Sorry, I did mean in the prior map. But I thought it was
yes, yeah.
other than something else.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, wait, no, I might
It
just
was
be.
colored as tripartite.
What's the one under that? Is that
Marathi.
Marathi? Okay.
Marathi.
Why is it
Yeah.
tripartite?
I don't know. The thing is, okay, so these typological surveys are good for like high level stuff, but they do break down when you stare at individual data points more closely. And this is just it's like basically an uncertainty principle. You can only, the more you try and get deep down in the rabbit hole of the actual language, the less coverage you can get. So there's some there can be very different analyses of similar languages that just kind of that are the same data can lead you to different conclusions depending on your analysis, which is unfortunate. And so that's sometimes what happens is you're referring to an analysis that is just very different from a standard. Or, there's something that is missing in the resource that you're using. Here we have Mohawk and Oneida. Mohawk is Ganikeha, that we looked at before. These are very similar, like they're mutually intelligible, but in some categories they have different values listed, just simply because the different grammars analyze the same phenomenon differently. So don't worry too hard about the individual languages is basically what I say. And kind of, you have to look at a kind of higher scope. I'm going to do one more thing, and then I think we're going to call it. But there was a question about, right, we can do a comparison on alignment of person marking and case marking, right? And we can look at the numbers here. So of the languages that we have data for that have, so this is basically languages that have, it is very common to be nominative accusative in verbal person marking and case marking. Slightly, and the same to be accusative verbal marking and neutral in your case marking. So let's look at the ergative accusative, right? So you can see that we have 7 languages that are accusative in verbal person marking and ergative in case marking. But let's see if we can find the reverse, right? Ergative accusative. Yeah. So you'll see here, there are actually no languages that they have listed as having ergative verbal alignment, but nominative accusative case marking. So this is that gap that I was talking about before, that it's hypothesized that you only get one direction but not the other. And this is something that, yeah, it's weird, and it's, how are we going to account for that? Is that something that you account for in your model of language? But yeah, that's that. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for bearing with me and listening and participating.
Thank you for the talk.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to leave it on the slide and then end the recording. Goodbye.